The Tonight Show's iconic blue curtain parts. Johnny Carson strides to his mark, delivers his monologue, and takes his seat behind the desk. For 30 years, this ritual played out with clockwork precision. Television's most dependable nightly comfort. But behind that well-oiled machine lurked a chaotic reality that viewers rarely glimpsed. The unpredictable, sometimes alarming state of the celebrities waiting nervously backstage. Johnny had a sixth sense about it the moment they walked out, revealed a former Tonight Show producer who worked with Carson throughout the 70s. He could tell within seconds if someone was drunk, stoned, coked up, or worse. His eyes would get this certain look. Part amusement, part, oh God, here we go. While Carson maintained his legendary cool on camera, the reality behind the scenes was often far more dramatic. Production assistants were trained to watch for warning signs. Segment producers developed emergency backup plans. Executives occasionally hovered nervously in the wings. "We had code phrases," explained a former Tonight Show staffer. If Johnny touched his tie while introducing someone, it meant this person is not entirely sober. If he straightened his cards twice, it signaled the director to keep camera shots simple because our guest might be unpredictable. Today, we're uncovering the 10 most infamous cases of celebrities who appeared on The Tonight Show while clearly under the influence, and the remarkable ways Johnny Carson handled these unpredictable, sometimes career-defining moments. George Carlin, the functioning stoner. George Carlin transformed from clean-cut comedian to counterculture hero during the early 70s, growing his hair, changing his material, and embracing the era's drug culture. Changes that were definitely reflected in his Tonight Show appearances. He riffed like a genius and grinned like a stoner, remembered a camera operator who worked many of Carlin's Tonight Show segments. There was never any question. George wasn't hiding it. That slightly glazed look in his eyes was practically part of his brand by then. Carlin appeared on The Tonight Show over 130 times, establishing himself as one of Carson's most reliable and popular guests. Yet despite this apparent approval, Carson never selected him as guest host, a distinction many other comedians received. Johnny enjoyed George enormously and respected his brilliance, explained a former Tonight Show writer. But he wouldn't let him guest host. The unspoken reason was reliability. Johnny knew George's lifestyle and wasn't confident he could handle the responsibility of running the show for 90 minutes. What made Carlin unique was his functionality. Unlike others who became incoherent or unpredictable, Carlin remained sharp, witty, and professional, just with a distinctly relaxed vibe that regular viewers definitely noticed. Carlin himself later confirmed suspicions in his autobiography, writing, "Was I usually stoned during my Carson spots in the 70s? Of course I was. It was the 70s, and I was George Carlin. Do the math. Cheech and Chong. Truth in advertising." Some Tonight Show guests made no pretense about their relationship with recreational substances, none more famously than comedy duo Cheech Marin and Tommy Chong, whose entire brand was built around cannabis culture. "They weren't acting. That's just where their brains lived," laughed a former segment producer who worked on several of their Tonight Show appearances throughout the late 70s and early 80s. What made Cheech and Chong unique was Carson's willingness to essentially incorporate their state into the comedy. Rather than working around or disguising their obvious cannabis consumption, Carson would play the straight man to their stoner antics. Johnny would put on this exaggerated square persona with them, recalled a former writer. He'd pretend not to understand their drug references, asking innocent questions that set them up perfectly. It was this wonderful comedy dance where everyone was in on the joke. During one memorable appearance promoting their film Up in Smoke, Chong began a rambling, disconnected anecdote about the movie's production. Rather than redirect or rescue him, Richard Pryor, comedy's raw nerve exposed. If Carlin represented functional cannabis use, Richard Pryor embodied something more volatile, a genius comedian whose substance issues sometimes pushed Tonight Show appearances from brilliant to concerning in the blink of an eye. Recalled a stage manager who worked several of Pryor's Tonight Show appearances, Richard could start a segment as the sharpest, funniest person on the planet. Then suddenly his eyes would change and he'd go somewhere else mentally. Johnny would have to work like a traffic cop to get things back on track. Pryor's relationship with substances was complicated and well documented. His cocaine use in particular became increasingly problematic throughout the 70s, culminating in his infamous 1980 freebasing accident. Several of his Tonight Show appearances captured him at different points along this trajectory. One particularly memorable segment from 1978 started conventionally enough, with Pryor discussing his latest projects. Midway through, however, he began a joke about his childhood that gradually dissolved into a disconnected series of observations, his focus visibly drifting. The audience, unsure if this was an intentional comedic choice or something unplanned, laughed nervously. Peter Fonda, easy rider, difficult guest. The counterculture revolution of the 60s brought new substances and new attitudes into the mainstream, sometimes colliding spectacularly with the conventions of network television, as happened during Peter Fonda's now legendary 1970 appearance. He talked about time travel. The segment lasted 5 minutes, recalled a director who worked on the show that night, succinctly summarizing one of the most bizarre interviews in Tonight Show history. Fonda, already famous for Easy Rider and his open advocacy of psychedelics, arrived for his scheduled appearance seemingly under the influence of what staffers strongly suspected was LSD. From the moment he walked on stage, it was clear this wouldn't be a standard interview. His pupils were the size of dinner plates, remembered a camera operator. He kept staring at the lights, then at his hands, then he'd suddenly snap back and try to answer Johnny's question from 30 seconds earlier. It was like watching someone tune in and out of our dimension. Carson, recognizing the situation immediately, shifted into what his team called damage control mode, asking extremely simple questions, keeping a pleasant but neutral expression, looking for the earliest appropriate moment to end the segment. The breaking point came when Carson asked about Fonda's upcoming projects, a standard talk show question designed to promote the guest's work. Fonda began a response about a new film, then abruptly shifted to discussing how time isn't linear, but wrapped around us like a blanket, and how we're all just riding the cosmic wave of consciousness. Foster Brooks, the method actor. Now, here's where things get interesting. Foster Brooks built an entire career playing a drunk. His slurring, stumbling character was so convincing that many viewers genuinely believed he was intoxicated during his Tonight Show appearances. The truth? Brooks was completely sober. Foster would show up, stone cold sober, have 1 glass of water, and then go out there and do that whole drunk act. Remembered a makeup artist who worked with him multiple times. Johnny loved it because Foster was so professional. He could turn it on and off like a light switch. But here's the fascinating part. Because Brooks's drunk act was so believable, Carson would sometimes play along as though Brooks actually was impaired, creating this meta-comedy where the audience wasn't entirely sure what was real. It was brilliant, noted a writer who worked on several Brooks segments. Johnny would do this exaggerated concern, asking Foster if he was okay, pretending to steady him. Truman Capote, literary genius, television disaster. Not all chemically enhanced Tonight Show appearances involved the controlled chaos of comedians. Sometimes the most alarming incidents came from unexpected sources, like the distinguished literary icon whose 1980 appearance became legendary for all the wrong reasons. America's literary darling, completely wasted, was how one production assistant succinctly described Truman Capote's infamous Tonight Show disaster. Capote had appeared on the show many times over the years, usually displaying the sharp wit and keen observations that made him a talk show favorite. But his January 1980 appearance was different from the moment he wobbled onto the set. He was slurring so badly you could barely understand him, recalled a sound technician who worked that night. His head kept nodding forward, then he'd snap back to attention with this startled look. The control room was panicking. They kept cutting to Johnny's reaction shots because at least those were coherent. Unlike his handling of Carlin or Pryor, where Carson adapted to their altered states with good humor, his response to Capote's condition was markedly different. Viewers at home saw Carson's smile tighten, his questions simplify, as he attempted to salvage what was quickly becoming an unbearable segment. Andy Kaufman, performance art, or pills? Andy Kaufman presents a unique challenge when discussing impaired Tonight Show appearances. Because with Kaufman, you could never be entirely certain what was real and what was performance. Andy would do things that made you wonder if he was on something, but then you'd realize that was exactly what he wanted you to think, explained a segment producer who worked with Kaufman multiple times. He was brilliant at blurring those lines. During one 1979 appearance, Kaufman seemed disoriented and confused, repeatedly asking Carson the same questions and appearing not to recognize where he was. Some crew members suspected he'd taken something. Others insisted it was classic Kaufman performance art. The control room was divided, remembered a director. Half the team was saying, "We need to cut this short, he's not okay." The other half was saying, "No, this is Andy being Andy. Johnny just wrote it out, treating it like it was all intentional." Years later, Kaufman's frequent collaborator Bob Zmuda suggested that at least some of Kaufman's Stranger Tonight Show moments involved actual chemical assistance, not just elaborate acting. Andy believed in total commitment, Zmuda reportedly said. If the character he was playing would be high, Andy would get high. That was his process. Whether Kaufman was genuinely impaired or simply the greatest actor of his generation remains a mystery, which is probably exactly how he would have wanted it. Sammy Davis Jr., the ultimate entertainer's secret fuel. Some Tonight Show appearances became legendary, not for obvious impairment, but for the whispered rumors that followed. None generated more persistent speculation than Sammy Davis Jr.'s hyperkinetic 1974 interview that had viewers wondering what exactly was powering the legendary entertainer. Davis was a Tonight Show regular and one of Carson's favorite guests, a consummate entertainer whose combination of musical talent, comedy chops, and fascinating life stories made him television gold. But his 1974 appearance stood out for its unusually amped-up energy. He was talking a mile a minute, couldn't sit still, kept interrupting himself to start new thoughts, recalled a sound technician who worked the show. His eyes were darting everywhere. He was sweating under the lights more than usual. He just seemed accelerated. While many viewers simply saw an enthusiastic Sammy being Sammy, industry insiders recognized the telltale signs of cocaine use that had become increasingly common in entertainment circles during the mid-70s. Oliver Reed, the British Bulldog Unleashed. Not all chemically enhanced Tonight Show appearances were played for laughs. Some, like British actor Oliver Reed's infamous 1975 visit, demonstrated how quickly substance use could transform entertainment into genuine concern. Reed, already known in Britain for his hard-drinking, hard-living persona, arrived for his Tonight Show appearance visibly intoxicated. What started as slurred but manageable responses quickly escalated as Reed became increasingly animated and unpredictable. You could see Johnny's expression change when Reed started getting loud, recalled the stage manager. Carson had this amazing ability to read guests, and you could tell the moment he realized this isn't just a guy who had a few drinks. This is someone volatile who might do anything. The situation deteriorated when Reed began interrupting Carson's questions with non sequiturs and occasional shouts. At one point, he stood up unexpectedly and began demonstrating a fighting stance, causing visible concern among crew members. The tension in the studio was incredible, remembered a cameraman. Security guys moved closer to the stage. Johnny kept his cool outwardly, but you could see his body language change. He was ready to move if needed. Grace Slick, psychedelic pioneer, network nightmare. Grace Slick of Jefferson Airplane was scheduled to appear on The Tonight Show in 1969, during the peak of the band's fame and the height of the psychedelic era. The appearance never happened, but the story of why became one of the most legendary behind-the-scenes disasters in Tonight Show history. Grace showed up with Abby Hoffman, remembered a production assistant who was working that night. That should have been the first warning sign. The second was that she could barely stand up. According to multiple crew members, Slick arrived at the studio several hours before her scheduled appearance, already significantly impaired. As the evening progressed, her condition didn't improve. She kept saying she was going to dedicate a song to Trisha Nixon, and then do something that would, quote, blow everyone's minds, recalled the segment producer. We had no idea what that meant, but it didn't sound good. As showtime approached, NBC executives made the decision to cancel her appearance entirely. Johnny was actually relieved, said the producer. He'd been briefed on her condition and knew there was no way to make it work. This wasn't someone who was a little loose. Johnny Carson's handling of these 10 high-flying guests reveals much about both the era and the man who defined late-night television for a generation. Johnny was navigating a cultural revolution in real time, explained a television historian specializing in 70s broadcasting. Attitudes toward recreational substances were changing dramatically. He had to find a middle ground between reflecting these cultural shifts and maintaining standards appropriate for broadcast television. Carson developed what his staff called an impairment spectrum, different responses based on how a guest's state affected their ability to create good television. Johnny didn't care what you did before the show as long as you could deliver on air, said his former producer. George Carlin, stoned but brilliant, no problem. Truman Capote, incoherent and barely conscious, big problem. It wasn't about the substances themselves. It was about respecting the audience and the medium. The exception to this protective approach came when a guest's condition led to behavior Carson found truly unacceptable: aggression, hostility, or complete non-functionality. In those rare cases, as with Oliver Reed and Truman Capote, Carson's tolerance ended abruptly. What's particularly striking about Carson's era compared to today is how these chemically enhanced appearances were handled in the moment versus how they would be treated. Which of these moments surprised you the most? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more behind-the-scenes stories from television's golden age.